Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen. John Dove here, founder of Speed Mooting, and welcome to our third podcast of 2023. We've got a very special guest today. We've got Matthew Parry, who has been a judge at many national speed mooting competitions and other mooting competitions that we run. Matthew, would you like to introduce who you are and what your role is?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name's Matthew Parry. I'm currently a lecturer at the Hillary Rodham Clinton School of Law at Swansea University, and before moving into academia, I was a solicitor advocate.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, great to have you on the podcast. So we'll start with that actually. So you've talked about your sort of past career. So would you like to talk us through your route into the law and then into academia after that?
Absolutely. Essentially, and I'm not going to give dates because it's going back far too long than I care to remember. Uh, After I finished studying an undergraduate law degree, my heart was set on going to the bar as a barrister. So I did what was then the bar vocational course. I lose track as to what it's called now, and went on the normal hunt for pupillage. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful, so I began to do work as a solicitor's agent, which involved a lot of advocacy in county courts, which I loved. Realizing I wasn't going to get pupillage, I cross qualified to the solicitor's side of the profession and then did higher rights in civil. And unlike you, John, crime, never a huge passion of mine. So civil was the route I chose to go in that. And then in 2018, I moved into the academic side of law and joined Swansea, which is where I've been ever since.
Oh, brilliant. Sounds very interesting. So of course, you're now in academia. Do you have a specific area that you teach or a specific area of specialism?
Yeah, I mean, typically I tend to teach on the compulsory modules, land law and sometimes contract law, which was also where I tended to practice in when I was in practice. I also teach some skills-based modules, specifically negotiations, as an elective module to second years and to third years.
Brilliant. Okay, well, just come back to that actually in terms because this might be interesting for some of our listeners to hear about because a lot of our guests that do advocacy tend to be at the bar. We don't really hear quite often from sort of solicitor advocates. So in terms of your practice in civil, was there much of a divide between sort of the advocacy that you would keep yourself and anything that would go off to the independent bar?
I think it's one of those things in a way, and it's an interesting question because I do quite often get asked questions at the university about the path of a solicitor advocate, and the answer, of course, is that a solicitor advocate does have the same access to the courts as barristers. The main difference is, and it comes down to brutal finances, inevitably, that quite often it's cheaper to instruct counsel on a fixed fee rather than run the risk of an hourly rate solicitor advocate going off to court, potentially spending several hours in the waiting room before getting on for the trial and then the post trial analysis. So there were a lot of cases where it did go off to counsel, particularly anything that was longer, anything that would take considerable amount of time. What I tended to focus on, particularly in property law, were fairly what I'd call fairly straightforward applications, ones that I could be quite confident I'd be in court for multiple hearings, so I could actually make it cost effective and worth the client's while. But it did mean that that option was there. That if there was a case that particularly warranted it, it meant that it was an option to continue with advocacy. And I think if you look at the various strands of law, potentially in criminal law especially, I think there's a lot of scope for advocacy by solicitor advocates as well by the bar. And I think it's something I always talk to students about as being a possible avenue, not necessarily a better avenue, not necessarily a worse avenue, but something to consider that if you like advocacy, the bar is not the only route to go down. You can become a solicitor, get higher rights, and then pursue the advocacy that you enjoy as well.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you said that because most people sort of associate advocacy with the bar, and that's all that's really taught at university. So people don't really understand that option and how it really is an option and an avenue for lots of advocacy, and particularly within crime. The scope for solicitors to do absolutely anything really, and on a practical level, solicitors do. So yeah, but it
Yeah.
was interesting to ask the question because I didn't really know from a civil point of view.
Yeah, the reality is in civil, the cost factor will almost always dominate. But And again, there are firms, I think now more and more, that have specialist advocacy departments where one of the big advantages they offer to their clients are the opportunity to do from the very start of the case to the very end of the case, with the possible exception of going off for specialist advice and opinions where necessary. And I think it's something that's growing. I mean, ever since I was at law school, a long time ago, there has been this big question as to, are the two sides of the profession merging? Are they coming closer together? They're still separate, and they still have very individual specialities. But there is certainly a great opportunity to do advocacy if you do qualify as a solicitor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the question that's always asked. And I don't see it ever happening that the two professions will merge, but the lines are certainly starting to blur. You know, there's a lot more advocacy for solicitors and also a little bit of litigation for barristers now as well. So
yeah, well, the direct access has closed the gap from the other side as well. So barristers having the opportunity to handle a case from the very start. So the lines are very much. I mean, in a way, the nature of the operation to a degree is one of the big differentials now. And it's again something I always tell to students: if you're thinking about becoming a barrister, how comfortable would you be being self-employed? Because it's a big difference. I mean, I've been self-employed and I've been employed. I love the fact that you get the flexibility of being self-employed. I love the fact you get paid annual leave being employed. And so it's very much a mindset thing in some respects. And that's something, again, that's important to underline for students who are thinking about one route or the other.
Yeah, definitely. And it certainly helps to answer the question when it comes to forms: why do you want to be a solicitor, or why do you want to be a barrister? You know, if you've thought about that and the way in which you want to either be self-employed or employed, it helps you down.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Certainly. Okay, so moving on from that point then, kind of jumping around here in terms of what we were going to talk about tonight, but in terms of those that are aspiring to a career in law, whether it's as a solicitor, barrister, etc., any real advice that you've got for students while they're at that law degree stage or the GDL stage?
I think the most important, I mean, there is no one set path would be my first piece of advice. I mean, there's probably 2 points coming out here. The first is there's no set path, and don't necessarily expect to be in complete control of the direction that your career takes you in. And the best story I can give to illuminate this: when my best friend and I finished university at slightly different times at different universities, we both had the same idea. We both wanted to be barristers. We both wanted to do litigation, civil litigation or criminal law litigation. Absolutely. That was our 100% set absolute. No compromises, nothing but this will do, nothing else. Of course, we didn't really have a clear idea as to what would make us happy or what we would truly want. Right now, I'm an academic at a university, and my friend is a partner in a private client firm specializing in probate, and also a deputy district judge. So we're both as happy as we could possibly be with where we've ended up in our careers. If you told us that at the end of university, this is where we're going to end up, we would probably have said, really? Is that really where we're going to that? Because that wasn't what we had in our minds. So don't necessarily assume you're going to be in complete control of where you're going, and see where the journey takes you, because it will take you to unexpected destinations. That doesn't mean they're bad. Quite often, that's the good stuff. And it certainly has proven for me, and it certainly has proven for my friend. So that would be the first piece of advice. And the second would be, in a similar vein, get as much experience as you can. I don't care what it is. I don't care how relevant or irrelevant it may seem to your career in law, but try to get as much experience as you can, because it's not necessarily about finding what works for you as much as finding what you don't enjoy. If you do a week's work experience in family law and decide, I absolutely hate that, that's a good indication. It means you can probably say family law may not be for you. That's not a week wasted. That's absolutely a successful week. And so get as much experience. And I think it's really important to understand as well, it's really difficult now because a lot more students work often quite close to full-time hours at university. It's a much harder financial journey now. And so it can be quite difficult to get experience, but still, if you can get experience, whether it's remote, whether it's in person, whether it's paid, whether it's voluntary, whether it's a couple of days snatched here and there, I really encourage everyone to do that, because you will get an understanding of what you want, where you want to go, and just as importantly, where you don't want to go. And that will give you, apart from anything else, information and make sure that you make informed decisions.
Yeah, brilliant advice there. Couldn't have said that better myself. As you say, keep an open mind all the way throughout. I think that quite often that you can get a lot of people that are quite narrow-minded and think, right, that's it. I want to be a chancery law barrister, and that's all there is. Whereas, you need to keep your mind open and think, well, what about family law? What about being a solicitor? What about... And by trying these other experiences, that's how you find, A, what you don't like, but also you might come across a hidden gem that you didn't even think about.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, going back to my friend's experience, the reality is people say crime will never go away. Probate's never going to go away either. So it's an area of law. Nobody goes into law school, I don't think, maybe 1 in 100, saying, I want to go away from here as a private client lawyer. But actually, it's a really good path to go in because the work will always be there. And realistically, most people do enter law school looking to enter a career. It's not a path I've ever taken, but there are lots of paths out there that can be very fulfilling, very satisfying, and can really help you to enjoy your experiences in the law.
Definitely. I remember it in my first week at law school, actually. And one of the things that we were told in one of these sort of introductory welcome lectures is that no matter what happens in the economy, lawyers will always sort of land on their feet because there's always something there for lawyers to do. With certain caveats, but as a general rule, you can be quite flexible as a lawyer, and there's always something that you can turn your hand to. So completely agree.
And again, most of the skills are very transferable. So
precisely, yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the things as well. Obviously, yourself and your friend both ended up in the law within some context. I've got a number of friends, and you probably have as well, and they had grand dreams of being sort of a lawyer at law school, but have ended up in completely different career paths, recruitment, business, etc. And that law degree really is quite helpful, I think.
Absolutely. And again, it was something that even when I did the law degree, it was sold as it was the degree I think people did if they didn't know what they want to do. I think there is still wisdom to that. And if you approach it in a very proactive fashion, there are lots of transferable skills that can apply to lots of different areas and careers.
Okay. All right. So coming back to academia then, and I asked this same question to most of our panelists. What do you enjoy most about your role?
I think for me, it's the ability to work with the students and to help to develop their skills and their understanding of the law, and also to help them in achieving their goals within the law. And it's working with students has always been something that's interested me. When I was a practicing solicitor, I did still work with students at various law schools, but obviously it always came very much second to the practice of law. So being able to go into a class, teach students about how wonderful land law is, which is a little difficult at times because it's taught at the same time as criminal law. So it's a second-year subject at Swansea alongside criminal law. And for some reason, people seem to think criminal law is more interesting than land law. I can't possibly imagine why. But it's so being able to help them to understand the procedures, the concepts, the legal principles, but also helping them through their 3-year journey. And that's something that I find very fulfilling. Because you're taking them coming into law school when they don't necessarily know a great deal about law, and hopefully helping them through their journey to a point where A, they really enjoy the law, and B, where they want to go off and are prepared to go off and continue their own journey in the legal profession.
Yeah, well, great answer there. So it sounds like it's a very fulfilling career for you then.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I think the big thing you always ask yourself is on a Sunday evening, are you looking forward to going into work on Monday morning? And that is a question I absolutely answer 100% yes, even if it's a 9 o'clock seminar
on land law.
As I say, look. The thing about land law is, and I say this is the pep talk I give to all my students at the start of every year, and I very rarely manage to convince any of them. But criminal law, yes, it's interesting, yes, it's engaging, and yes, obviously, taken at an academic level, it's exciting. But the question I always ask them is, how many of you want to be personally involved in the criminal law system, not professionally, personally? And obviously, none of them say yes. Land law is absolutely relevant to every single one of them because the chances are they are tenants in their properties. A lot of them want to own properties. They certainly want to move into properties later. And there are so many parts of land law that are absolutely essential to that. And it's something that they can find relevant right from the start. That doesn't always work. but that's my pitch anyway, and I'm sticking to it.
I like that. That's very true, actually. Yeah, I mean, on a personal level, I suppose, take professionally out of it. I suppose on a personal level, I've had more involvement in land law than criminal
Yeah,
law. So yeah, so
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
That's my pitch. I say it doesn't necessarily convince.
So do you teach equity before land law in your
We actually teach it. We
university?
teach it side by side. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
one of the joint. And actually, personally, that's how I studied it accidentally in my undergrad because I did a year abroad when I was at undergrad level. So land law and equity were shunted from the first year and the second year to my final year to make room for some other modules. And I actually found that studying the two side by side was a real advantage because I think to fully understand land law, you won't need to understand equity. To fully understand equity, it helps to understand land law. So
Hmm.
teaching them side by side, and I actually think that's a very strong way of doing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, we did equity before land, so equity was second year, and then land in third year, and crime
Yeah.
in first year, incidentally. Yeah, I think every university is just unique, isn't it, and have their own way.
Absolutely, and there is no. I mean, that's the thing. It's not a Rubik's cube. There's no right answer, and it's just how it happens to work out. But for me personally, I prefer them being taught side by side.
Yeah. Now, of course, in addition to your lecturing, you do a lot of extracurricular activities, specifically in relation to mooting and other forms of practical skills. And would you just like to talk very briefly about your involvement in these extracurricular activities?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way this almost motivated my move from practice to academia because going back again to when I was at undergrad, um, back then there wasn't a huge amount of extracurricular activity opportunities. You had mooting, and basically you had internal mooting competitions, and then I think they picked a couple of teams to go to the OUP and the ESU. That was about it, really. Now there's so many more competitions out there, but back then it was just those two. And so I didn't really get that invested in it. And then for my third year, I studied in America. And the first semester was in the Louis Brandeis School of Law in Kentucky.
Mhm.
And one of the courses I took was negotiations, mainly because it was sounded fun and it sounded interesting. It was something I thought I wouldn't get the chance to study elsewhere. And as part of that, I entered the negotiations competition, and it was kind of like being bitten by a bug. I had so much fun. I learned so much more, and I'm a very competitive person anyway. So it added for me a real zest to the learning. And
Mhm.
that I think is something that I've very much taken through after I came back, which is that it's a different form of learning. The opportunity to compete in a competition is a different form of learning. It allows you to use something that is in every human being, which is competitiveness. I don't care if you say you're not competitive, you are, even if it's only 5%. You may not be very competitive, but there's an element of competitiveness there, all the way through to people who are 95 to 100% competitive. And so I personally I find that people are more inspired and motivated to learn if they have a competitive edge to it. And I think that's actually borne out by a lot of what you see on TV. So things like the cooking programs, MasterChef, The Professionals, that sort of thing. I think people do learn alongside competition really, really well. So it adds that element to it. And that's something that I tried to push into the education at Swansea. And so we have a very proactive well, I tend to call it skills communications program, which covers all bases. So it covers mooting, it covers trial advocacy, it covers client interviewing, so interviewing a client for the first time, it covers negotiations, and it covers mediation. And so they are all the phrase is soft skills, which I'm not a huge fan of, but they're skills that are essential not only in the practice of law but in so many other areas as well, and they are very much transferable skills. And often you find that the skills between the competitions are very much the same. So communication, the ability to advocate, it's necessary in all of them.
Yeah.
The ability to listen, the ability to empathize, the ability to prepare, to plan, and to work as a team quite often. Again, these are all skills that are not only relevant for all the competitions, but are transferable to so many different careers.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I think the thing that comes through is persuasiveness is required for almost all of those. Whether you stood up in a court and you need to sort of convince the judge that your argument is right, or whether you're in a negotiation trying to convince the other side that you've got the stronger hand, so to speak. You need to be persuasive. Equally with your client, you need to be persuasive when delivering the advice. So it's the same skill that's sort of repeated all the way through, and is that sort of common denominator there.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think, as you say, I think it really helps because, you'll learn a lot from sort of attending lectures, reading your law books, reading the case law, etc. But then by getting involved in practical skills like this, mooting, debating, etc., negotiations, you're thinking practically about how the law actually applies and how you can utilize that.
Absolutely. I mean, a good example is if you have a situation that you're a neighbor dispute or something like that, and it could be something as simple as, that the neighbor has kicked a ball into your garden and broken a greenhouse. I mean, yeah, of course, if you're applying basic principles of law, you'll look in to see was there damage caused? Was it caused by negligence, etc., etc.? You'll tick off all the legal boxes, and you might come up with the conclusion, well, yep, there's a good claim here. They should sue them. And of course, that's a terrible answer to give to someone in real life because the practicalities start to kick in as to, well, who's going to pay for this? And the reality is that there are so many better ways of dealing with it. What are you going to do about the neighbor? Because you've got to potentially live next to them for the next 20 years. How are you going to cover that? Are they going to be in a position where you want to live next door to them if you decide to take them to the county court? And of course, it brings up very much the practicality of it, and something I tend to try to hone in on is the fact that lawyers nowadays are problem solvers as much as anything, and it's the old phrase again, commercial awareness, that I think all of these the extracurricular activities can really help with, because they give you that base point to say, well, look, I can't just recite the laws of contract or tort or crime. I can actually apply them in a practical setting so that when I go and see a client on behalf of whoever my employer is, I can give sound advice. If I'm negotiating, I won't make a deal that is completely not non-viable. If I'm going before a district judge, I won't necessarily waste in a 10-minute hearing, start citing 17 cases without realizing, actually, that's not what the judge wants.
Yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the head there. And I think that's probably the best explanation of commercial awareness. It's thinking about the practicalities of what your client actually wants. So, you need to be able to give advice in a simple, easily palatable manner. But also advice that's practical. No one's going to want to waste tens of thousands of pounds on a lawsuit when you can easily just settle and have the claim sorted in a shorter period of time. So, yeah, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head with commercial awareness there. Now, of course, you've judged at quite a few national speed mooting competitions now. And I think coming back to what you mentioned before about the fact that there weren't many mooting competitions previously, I mean, that's part of the reason I actually set the competition up, because when I was at university, there were we had internal competitions and that was it. But unless you were in with the right people, you would never be put forward for sort of, the large external competitions, etc. So I think what I like about the national speed moot is anyone can enter it independently of whether your university put you forward, etc. So there's obviously a lot more opportunities these days in terms of different types of competitions. Are there any sort of common mistakes that you see from mooters when you've judged these competitions, and any tips that you can give for potential mooters?
I mean, I don't really know common mistakes, mainly because the quality of mooting nowadays is so incredibly good. And it's actually, to a degree, particularly the national speed mooting competitions, when I've judged there, I've been absolutely blown away by just how good the students are. And it's a brilliant leap forward. And I think that it's actually something that I'm seeing in all the competitions that I do, the increasing levels of competence and strength. I suppose the one mistake that I do perhaps see more often than not, not necessarily at that competition, but at others, is assuming the judge knows too much. And that's something as well that I tend to see often in assessments as well, which is this assumption that you know it, therefore the other person knows. And that probably is the case. But it's very much this question of making sure you take the judge from A to B to C to D so you get to E, rather than going A to D and then to E. Because even if the judge does know how to get there, and they probably will, they need you to spell it out to make sure that there's no corners being cut. And so it's very much a question of, I'm not saying, say, this is the law of contract and therefore this is offer acceptance and everything else, but make sure you take the judge very clearly through your arguments so that if there are any areas of weakness, the judge will ask you questions, you can deal with them.
Mhm.
But that helps you to stay in control of the arguments far more completely. Whereas if you start jumping bases, the judge is likely to pick up on whatever they feel like, and that will probably take you out of your flow more completely. That if you're taking nice short strides to get to where you want to. So that would be the first. That would be really the only big weakness that I tend to occasionally see. I think in terms of advice, perhaps the strongest piece of advice I can give is make sure you find your own voice.
Mm.
And I think that's really important because a lot of people probably think in order to be a good or great barrister or a great advocate, I have to find a great advocate and copy their style. And that is probably the one guaranteed way of not achieving what you want to achieve, because you will never be as good mimicking somebody else as following your own path, following your own voice. And it's, I think, one of the big myths in advocacy generally, which is, well, I can't be a great advocate because of my accent.
Mm.
And it's something that I occasionally get because, of course, in Swansea, I get a lot of Welsh students. A lot of people say, "Well, is my accent barristerial enough?" And the answer is, there's no such thing. There's no such bloody thing as a barristerial voice. It's your voice. Turn it into a persuasive voice. And if you have an accent, use it because it's a godsend. The only thing that doesn't work in advocacy is if you're boring.
Yeah.
And now I have what may well be termed historically that sort of accent that people might say that's the sort of accent you want. I actually find it's a very boring accent, and I have to work very hard to make myself more persuasive. Compare that to a beautiful Welsh accent that has lilt, it has a great tempo, it has real conviction behind it, or a Northern accent or a Midlands accent. It's interesting, it's engaging. You want to listen to it time and time again. So don't run away from your own voice. Develop your own voice by using some of the ideas that you can use and steal outright from other good or great advocates. So things like rhetoric, yes, understand rhetoric, but apply it to your voice rather than try to copy somebody else. And that perhaps is for me such an important thing, because as long as you utilize your strengths, that will help you to have a really powerful voice. And that will help you to be a really good advocate. The flip side of that, of course, is also be aware of the potential weaknesses of your accent. And again, the Welsh accent, the Irish accent are two good examples. They're brilliant to listen to, but if you speak too quickly, they can sometimes become incomprehensible.
Yeah.
That's not a weakness of the accent. That's a weakness in you in going too fast. So again, I always say slow down, make sure that every word you utter is clear and can be heard properly. Because when you've got a beautiful accent, as most accents are, utilize its strengths and work out how to avoid falling into traps like going too fast.
Brilliant. Great advice there. I mean, I asked this question to most of our panelists that have been mooting judges. And what's been interesting is I've had a unique answer every time. And I think that what you've said there is absolutely fantastic because, as you say, most people think that they need this sort of bar voice, sounding very posh, very slow. And that's not the answer at all. If you go into any courtroom, you will not see that. You'll see all of the advocates being very unique and effectively being themselves. So develop your own style. And that's the best way. Trying to mimic somebody else just isn't going to work, is it?
No. And at the end of the day, you'll be more persuasive if you're natural. And if you try to, if you're half thinking about how you speak and how you dress it up, you're not thinking about the substance, the content. You're not reading the judge. 10% of your mind is occupied on something else, and it's like if you're following the football score, 10% of your mind is occupied on that rather than what you're doing, and that just doesn't work as well.
Yeah, no, not at all. Well, I think you've covered a lot there and you've given a lot of great advice. We're going to move on to the sort of final quickfire round in just a moment. But just before we do, is there any other advice or wisdom that you'd like to share for anybody just generally?
Have fun is really the most important. And again, this goes mainly for competitions, but it goes for the practice as well, because people often ask me, how do I relax ahead of these things? And the answer I always give is have fun. Because if you have fun, you'll be more relaxed. And if you're more relaxed, you'll do better.
Mm.
And it's almost a circle in a way, because if you do well, you'll have fun and then you'll be relaxed. And again, but it is a beautiful circle because it all starts with making sure you enjoy it. Yes, there are going to be stressful moments. Yes, there are going to be moments when you're thinking, oh my God, why am I doing this? Possibly in land law exams. But the reality is, if you can find something in every experience to enjoy, you will inevitably be more relaxed. And once you're more relaxed, you will stop worrying about doing well and you will do well. And so that for me, and again, in the same way, if you go to a job interview and you're getting battered left, right, and center, and you're feeling quite offended by the questions, you're probably not enjoying yourself. It doesn't mean turn them down if they offer you a job, but it's probably a guidance to say, is this a place where you want to work? If you're having fun at an interview, and again, I appreciate that that is something of a contradiction in terms, but if you're having fun at an interview, that's probably a good indication that you are gelling with the people who are asking you questions. And you will therefore be more relaxed, and you will probably end up doing a lot better and giving the best possible reflection of your own skills.
Yeah, completely agree there. The thing to think with an interview is, it works both ways. Yes, they're interviewing you for the job, but equally you're going in to in a way, interview your interviewers to find out if you actually want to work at that place. So yeah, good way to think about it, actually. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for all of the advice that you've shared there for our listeners. So we're going to move on to the fun part now, a fun interview, as you might say. So just a few sort of quick fire rounds, quick fire questions just at the end. So I'm going to start with the most important question that I ask to all of my guests, and it'd be interesting to get your opinion on this. So first question, crisps on a sandwich, do they belong there?
No.
Oh, interesting.
No.
Okay, all right. Well, that's
two reasons. For the first reason is I can't imagine crisps and butter going well, and the second is if you haven't got butter there, they're going to fall out.
That's very true, actually, very true. I have to say, there's a certain store that sells sort of a meal deal sandwich and drink and crisps, etc. And I'm for listeners of the podcast, you will know this, I'm a big advocate of crisps on a sandwich, but there's a certain place I go to and they do cheese only sandwiches, which is what I like, but they don't put butter or margarine on, and as you say, you crush the crisps in and sometimes they do fall out, so that's a good point, actually. But no, interesting, that's our first no. So
oh, really?
Yeah, that's our first no. So up until today, crisps were unanimous and undefeated, but that's the first loss on its record. So yeah, sorry to all the crisp fans out there.
Yeah, I've probably made about 500 enemies now.
So stemming from the sort of a similar topic, what would be your favorite food?
Oh, crumbs! Now these are really the difficult questions. It's a really interesting question, which, by the way, is also a good way of putting off judges in a moot if you're not quite sure of the answer. It depends very much on the setting, but I think a bacon sandwich can never go wrong as long as there's ketchup with it. Beyond that, I'm a big fan of carbonara and Italian food generally, so that would probably be my fallback. But bacon sandwiches with ketchup can't go wrong.
I like it. Yeah, nice and simple.
Yeah,
I'm the same. Simpler the better. You can't go wrong with pepperoni pizza. So yeah, big fan of the Italian myself.
Pineapple on pizza or no?
So I've been asked this question. I've got no issue with it, to be honest. I'm not really. So I don't. I neither like ham nor pineapple, but I've got no issue with. if I like those things, I'd probably have them on a pizza. But it's.
So if you've got Gordon Ramsay as a subscriber, we're probably both in trouble now.
Oh, is he not a fan?
Oh yeah, he's done rants about this.
Oh right. Well, Gordon, if you're listening, Gordon, if you want to come on the podcast and debate it with me, I'm more than happy to bring you on. Okay, favorite film?
V for Vendetta.
Oh, okay, not seeing that one.
No, it's an old film now. I'm not sure where it was, but it's got a fantastic cast, and it's a very interesting film. But more recently, I'm a big fan of all the Marvel films. So almost all the Marvel films, not quite all, but
okay. Have you? I think with a 23 or something in a row. Have you seen?
I've lost track. I think they're on to about 20. Yeah, there's a huge number now, but a lot of sometimes they do merge into one. But I've enjoyed watching the saga unfold.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent.
And they were very good. They got the main final one done before I had kids, so I was actually able to watch them. So
excellent. And last question is favorite holiday destination?
Italy.
Italy. Okay. Anywhere specifically?
Lake Iseo mainly. It's less popular than Lake Garda, but my wife and I visited there a couple of times, and it's primarily frequented by Italians rather than tourists, or by foreign tourists rather. And it's just beautiful. It's very laid back. It's very calm, and the people are lovely. The food is great, and it's not too far from an airport. So what more can you ask?
Oh, brilliant. Can't ask for much more. I seem to get great holiday recommendations every time I get a new guest. So
It's a good question to ask, actually.
yeah, yeah. Well, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for coming on to the podcast today, Matthew. I know that you're very busy, so I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
No problem, and thank you again for all your efforts with speed mooting, and for all the times you've judged at the competitions I've organised.
No, you're very welcome. I'm hoping to do that again this year. So yeah, it'll be great to come and judge again at your
Fantastic.
competition.
That's always
And
a dangerous thing to say.
it really is. Probably volunteer for too much, but no, I thoroughly enjoy it. It's like you were talking about with what you enjoy about your job. I like giving back as well, because I know that I certainly came into the law with no connections or anything like that. So anyway, I can give back and help the next generation. I'm always happy to do so. So yeah. So those of you listening, if you're going to compete in the national speed mooting competition this year, you never know, you might come across Matthew as one of your judges. So thank you once again, and I'll speak to my listeners on the next episode.